Hi, I'm Dr. Sea Rotmann, and I would like to talk a little bit about our International Energy Agency Demand Side Management Task 24 on behavior change. I'd like to talk about a particular aspect, namely how we view the energy system in our task, and this is as part of our extension proposal called How to Help the Behavior Changes. So the way we look at the energy system now is illustrated in this US government diagram quite well. It is a very top-down way of looking at it, with markets, operations, and the service provider being in charge of the system. And then there's also a left to right linear relationship from generation through transmission and distribution. Then I'd argue the technology that transmits the energy into the service that the customer then uses. But the customer sits there in that little corner down the bottom right. So what we propose is that there is another way, a more human way and more circular way to look at the energy system. And I'd like to talk you through that. So we'll start with the end user service need, the human need for energy. So this is me right now in June in Wellington, in a cold home in winter, and I've already done what every good Kiwi would do, which is I've got my beanie on, I've got 3 layers of clothing on, I'm wearing gloves, my cats are cuddled up to me, but it's pretty cold. So my comfort level right now is not great. What do? I go, and my behavioral response is to interact with my technology, which is my efficient fluid gas heater, and I turn it on. So what happens? Well, there is a wider context that needs to be explained in this as well. This is my house, and I've already talked a little bit about the cultural norms of New Zealanders, but we're basically from hardy Scottish stock, and pretty much the cultural norm here is to be used to not such great housing, and to not whinge about it, and to toughen up, and to just chuck on another chumper, and that's what we do. There is a wider issue, of course, about the geography and climate. I do live in a temperate climate in New Zealand. However, what you can see here is the view from my house. These are the snowy Alps of the South Island. And if you look a little bit further down to the south, that is Antarctica, a few thousand kilometers south. So when there is a southerly storm, I basically get Antarctic winds blowing straight at my house. Now, there is something to be said about our building stock. It's generally not great in our country. Mine's particularly bad. Here you can see my cat Loki in front of my tiny little beach house, which you can see is little more than a bird cage. It's almost 100 years old. It's got a tin roof. It's made out of wood. It's got single glazing, no insulation, no space for insulation, and has a lot of leaks. So the wider infrastructure, of course, is important as well. I was talking about housing in general in New Zealand, not so great. I'm quite lucky because I have access to gas mains, so I could get a fluid gas heater, but before I had an inefficient open fireplace, which was a nightmare because in Wellington you think only in kind of winds because it's the windiest city in the world. So in a northerly, all the fire was basically just sucked out of my chimney and there was no heat left in the room. And in a southerly, all the smoke was blown into my house, and that's when it was really cold, and so the living room was just smoked out. Now, as I said, I'm quite lucky not to have an open fireplace anymore and instead have a heater that heats my house up. But my neighbours, for example, still use the open fireplace, and it's of course got a whole lot of health and environmental implications that come with it. And then, of course, there's the wider political climate. Like, for example, we do have a very big national insulation subsidy scheme, but in my case, that wouldn't even help me because I don't actually have space for insulation. So that's my wider context and that of many other Kiwis. So if you take it to the national level, as I said, I'm quite lucky because I am somebody who's got my own house. I work in the energy efficiency profession, so I know a fair bit about it. I've done what I can. But there is many Kiwis who are in just as bad housing stock as me, who are shivering their way through. They may not own their own houses, so they may be dependent on landlords to do the right thing, which there isn't really an incentive for, and they're basically suffering. And we have a lot of issues around respiratory diseases in children in particular. So what happens when all these Kiwis are doing the various things to stay warm or comfortable as much as they can? Well, it is a drain on our transmission and distribution system because we have a very long country, very sparse population, 3 main population centres. Our main form of electricity generation is right down in the south in the hydro lakes, and our main demand is right up in the north in Auckland. So the transmission distribution system is taxed at the best of times. But during a winter's evening at 6 o'clock at night, when everyone comes home from work and turns on the heaters and has showers and does whatever they need to do in order to stay comfortable, there are some serious issues around peak load issues. So what happens? Well, we go back to energy supply, and our one coal-fired power station in Huntly has to be turned on in order to meet that peak demand. And why is it circular? Well, because in the end, after about a month, or I could jump on my app that I have on my iPhone and see my peak load right now as it's happening, I'm getting an invoice that says I have used a lot of power, way more than I did compared to last month, for example, or to the year before. And of course, on my particular invoice, I also have statements around how much that cost me and greenhouse gas implications. So that is how we see the energy system. It's not a top-down, left-to-right kind of system, but much more a circular system that is driven by the human need for the service that energy provides. Thank you.